Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 51. I have longtime libertarian activist Bretigne Shaffer on here. We're going to talk about some recent current events like Tucker Carlson, the war, and some other things going on right now. How are you, Bretigne?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, what do you think of this whole situation with Tucker? It's leaving Fox. It's interesting.
It is interesting. I don't know what to think. And, there's very little that I follow closely enough to say that I really know what's going on. And that's one of the things that being a journalist teaches you, or should teach you, is that it takes a lot of really rigorous digging into the facts before you know what's going on. And I don't think anyone, anything that makes it to the mainstream outlets, I don't think anyone really knows what's going on. I'm a fan of his. I disagree with much of what he says, but I shouldn't put it that way. I have a ton of respect. I don't agree with everything he says. I have a ton of respect for him for speaking out the way he has, and I do think it's hilarious. So one thing is that, them kicking him off of Fox, he's still got the same audience he had, once he's off of Fox. He's going to have the same audience. He's going to take all those people with him. So it's an illustration to me of the growing power of independent media and the decline, the demise sort of the mainstream. So it's a circus. I am sure he's going to do very, very well.
Yeah, that's the change here that's interesting. Cronkite retires from CBS, Dan Rather takes over, and there probably isn't much of a change, but it used to be maybe loyalty to the network, but now I think it's getting more loyalty to the person, which can be good or bad. I mean, Glenn Beck did the same thing. It's going to be very interesting to see where that goes. One thing I should ask you, how'd you become a libertarian? How'd you get involved in all this?
I was born into it.
Your father, of course, was Butler Shaffer. Yes.
Yeah. So my dad was Butler Shaffer. They, when I was a baby, they were involved in the Ayn Rand groups. I grew up in the Midwest, and my dad actually got kicked out of one of the Ayn Rand groups. This was back in the day when they would send out cassette tapes of her lectures to groups around the country, and you would listen to the tapes and discuss and everything. And my dad he was sort of stewarding one of those groups, and he got kicked out because he asked too many questions. So my dad was a Goldwater Republican. He was a delegate in whatever that was, 60, I guess
64.
It was. Yeah, 64, right before I was born. And those are kind of his roots. And then he sort of evolved into more, I would say, I don't like to use the word anarchist because it doesn't mean to others what it means to me, but he called himself that for many years. So that's kind of what I grew up with. I grew up in an environment that was just infused with the ideas of liberty, and then had to sort of, in junior high and high school, my sisters and I went to public schools, which was eye-opening and just, quite an experience. But from that point on, kind of had to see if my ideas, stood up to all the attacks that were coming from all different directions. I then went to one of the most left-wing colleges in the country, same thing. And so, I think my ideas have evolved since then, but I was definitely raised with those ideas.
Yeah. Which left-wing college was that?
UC Santa Cruz. And
the Banana Slugs.
The Banana Slugs. Yep.
Yeah. Did you by chance encounter Bandler and Grinder while you were there?
Bandler and Grinder,
the founders of neurolinguistic programming, because they were both at UC Santa Cruz for a while.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
I didn't. Do you know what years those were?
They were there in the late. Actually, they were there in the late 70s. So that might have been before.
But that would be before my time. Yeah, I was there in the 84 to 88.
Yeah. I don't know if they stuck around there or if they went.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, there was some really interesting. Tom Lehrer went there. I mean, didn't go there. He taught there. Tom Lehrer taught mathematics there, and he also taught a musical theater class that I auditioned for and didn't get in. But yeah, there was some interesting stuff going on there. but it was very much, if you were in the political debate at all, it was really kind of a sign of things to come, because we had an alternative. I was the editor of an alternative off-campus newspaper that was conservative and Republican. Sorry, it was conservative and libertarian, and it got thrown in the trash. It got, the people. One of our first editorial meetings, there was this group of people, of students outside, talking about how they were going to get us shut down and thrown off campus. So the whole shutting down of opposition and of just silencing opposing viewpoints, that probably wasn't at every campus back then, but it was really raging at UC Santa Cruz. So I, got a taste of that early.
Yeah, well, probably worse at all the UC campuses. But if you're surprised by what's happening in the colleges now, you've not been paying attention. You really haven't. I mean,
Yeah.
People, this was being called out in the 80s. I mean, Thomas Sowell wrote about it inside American Education.
Yep.
There was also a book by Martin Anderson called Imposters in the Temple that was a really good book in 92 or 93. You can look him up on C-SPAN. He talked about it for an hour. The books, I don't know how easy it is to find the book, but you can definitely find the talk on C-SPAN.
Right. Who was the author? Closing of the American Mind was a big book back then.
I think that was Alan Bloom.
Yes, I think, yes, that's right. That's
Closing
right.
of the American Mind. Yeah, Alan Bloom, I believe.
Yeah. This was in the 80s. I mean,
this was all brewing. And I think sometimes that's one of the frustrating things about being a libertarian nowadays is it's like, don't say we didn't warn you.
Yep.
But you ignore, you ignored the warnings and it's only gotten worse. And I don't. Yeah.
In defense of our critics, I think we tend to, and we do this with gold, we do this with money, with everything. It's like we tend to be like, well, this is coming down right now. It's all coming down right. It's, you gotta take these actions. And the truth is, we don't know what the timeline is. I mean, we can see that this is all happening. We can say, hey, you should be worried about this. This is a bad trend. But we can't say, yes, this is going to explode in 2020 or, whatever the year is, which is, fair enough. I mean, nobody can, but I can sort of see people getting tired of hearing about this from us when it doesn't seem to be an emergency until it is an emergency. And now it's an emergency. And, maybe you guys should have listened.
Yeah. Your father was so Butler was involved with the Nathaniel Branden Institute back in the 60s then, when it was, because from what I've heard, they had locations. I know they were headquartered in New York, but they had locations elsewhere.
Yeah. And I don't know so we were in Nebraska. I don't know if location is really the right word. It was almost like a subscription group kind of thing.
Okay.
Like there would be a designated leader discussion leader in each place, but basically they would send out these tapes. And then, it was all authorized by them. So like when my dad was kicked out, he was kicked out. They sent him a letter saying, we choose. Sorry?
Basically, they said, you can't promote this anymore and we won't send you any more tapes.
Yeah. But the way they said it was, they said, we choose not to be of service to you, or not to be of value to you anymore. It was just, weird linguistic turn of phrase there. But yeah, it wasn't like there was an office. It was more just, you are authorized to use these tapes and to discuss them and like that.
So I don't know if there would, I guess maybe if there had been something in Chicago, but it's hard to say. Because I think they did have some kind of satellite office out in Los Angeles, but I really don't know. I'd love to get somebody who can recall those days on here sometime, because there's got
to be a few left.
I mean, I really, because I often wonder just how much good they were doing, and how I also wonder, what would have happened. And because I love to speculate on history, what would have happened if this had not broken up? Because I think it was probably thriving and doing really well. And maybe it really would have made a difference. And instead it's just fizzled.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like with the personalities involved, because it was such a personality centered movement, I feel like that kind of thing is it's inevitable that it's going to break up. But I do feel like it, even though that movement itself fell apart, I feel like it influenced a lot of people. I think people who maybe got their intellectual start there, or just got their curiosity sparked. I think it did influence a lot of people.
Yeah. Did he say anything else about what the culture was there? I mean, I've also heard that the culture there was about 50-50 between men and women, but I could be.
I heard that too. Yeah. And he wasn't in New York, so it was probably very different across the country.
Yeah.
Most of the stories I've heard are the same ones you've heard, like about, Rothbard, Ayn Rand taking Joanne into the bedroom and trying to convert her into atheism, and she's just not interested, and
Yeah.
the thing.
I've heard various stories about that. I had another guy who told me apparently that Leonard Liggio was apparently in some kind of, Rand was talking and he fell asleep while Rand was talking.
I think I heard that too. Yeah.
And I can just imagine, oh my gosh, can you imagine how Rand would have reacted if somebody fell asleep while she was talking?
I would love to see that. I would have loved to see that.
I don't think Leonard Liggio is still alive anymore either.
No, he passed away a few years ago.
Yeah, because there were some very interesting people in that group. I know.
Yep.
I know, as far as I know, George Reisman is still alive. And I haven't heard anything from Alan and Joan Blumenthal in many, many years. I think they were, but they're still alive. But as far as I know, I haven't heard any reports if they are. I don't even know who would report on that if there was any news.
Yeah.
But yeah, and of course, Peikoff is still alive, for better or for worse. But yeah, so one word I know that's, when people don't like to use the word anarchist, they sometimes use the word voluntarist now.
Mm-hmm.
If I ever stopped calling myself a libertarian, I'd probably call myself a voluntarist. I
think it's the best word. I'm very wary of labels, and I think as our culture becomes more and more divisive and divided and simple-minded, I think it's dangerous to use. It's not just that they're not accurate. I think it's actually dangerous to use labels, because I'll say to someone, I'm a libertarian, and if they grew up in the mainstream culture and went to government schools and, have heard all the terrible things about libertarians, they have an idea in their head already about what that means. And so when they start a conversation with me, they're having a conversation with that thing that they've got in their own head, and it may have nothing to do with what I think. So I try as much as I can to stay away from labels, just because of that whole phenomenon. I think it's, it's so easy for people to just assume so much about your viewpoint when they really know nothing about it.
Yeah, labels, but they also, we always have to put things into categories, without, I know what you're saying, because we can't have a label for all. We're not going to mentally process, 300 million people.
Mm.
So that's why you put people into these boxes, but not everybody's easy or hard to put into a box.
Yeah.
I don't know who your dad was, because it sounds like your father, said, that's interesting too, though, because it seems like a lot of them start with objectivism and then go over to anarchism.
Yeah.
You don't still have that letter, do you, by chance?
My mom might. My mom, I'm going to make
it'd be funny to say, yes, we are no longer of value to you. I can imagine what these letters look like. I do wonder sometimes, though, looking at the splits, it's, what did your father think about the gaps that were widening between objectivists and libertarians? Because it seemed like in the 60s that was the movement, and now it's I don't think either side is really better off without the other.
Yeah, he didn't really talk that much about it. He was, I don't really know how to answer that. He, he had a lot of complaints about all sides, but I feel like the circles that he traveled in, I mean, growing up, it was more about like these libertarian supper clubs. We would, it was about specific individuals that he was in touch with and he knew, and it was it was some people who are like Sam Conkin and Brad Lineweaver and people who are known, but it just seemed like such a small informal world back then, and then it changed really fast with the internet. It became this whole new thing, where it's spread out and there are all these clicks. So I don't think he was really that in touch with all the new so the new explosion of libertarianism and all the different groups that have developed in like the last 30 years. I just don't think he was. I mean, obviously, he knew Ron Paul and he spoke at Ron Paul's big event alongside the Republican National Convention and all that, but he wasn't really plugged into the different groups and the feuds and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think of how we used to organize things back then, and he was doing this in a day when it was almost all via snail mail.
Yeah.
We didn't have email, and generally you didn't make phone calls across the country like we do now, just at the drop of a hat. It's changed a lot. Back then, the long distance phone call was a big deal.
It cost something.
It could definitely. I mean, yeah, you could have a 1 hour phone call might cost you $15, or and considering the time that might have been 3 hours of your paycheck right there. What a phone call might have been. It was just, and now we're even able to make international calls cheaper than that. It's
yeah. It was a different world. Yeah, and there was something nice about doing so much in person and just hanging out with these people and meeting up at Marie Callender's and just sitting there and having these casual conversations. It was definitely a different world.
So you were in Nebraska, you said?
So we were in Nebraska until 1977, and then we moved to California. And I lived in California until until the mid 80s, and then I was in college, but then went and lived in Asia for a long time, and was back and forth between Asia and the U.S. So.
Oh, you didn't live in Omaha, did you?
Yeah, we were in Omaha.
Was he connected with Howard Buffett by chance? Because he was actually very much a free market congressperson. He's Warren Buffett's father.
I don't think so. I think I would have heard about that. I don't think so.
Warren's completely in the system, but it's but his father was actually. But I wonder too if Warren must have learned something from his dad. He probably did. So you were in Asia. Where were you in Asia?
Mostly in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for a total of about 7 years in a couple of 2 or 3 different times. But also Taiwan and Japan.
What do you think? What was it about that made Hong Kong work as well as it did?
It was. I mean, obviously, it was the laissez-faire system. But the reason they were able to implement the laissez-faire system, and first of all, it was mostly down to one man, Sir John Cowperthwaite, who was financial secretary during the time that they experienced this tremendous economic boom, and he really stuck to the principle of non-intervention. Honestly, it's because it was a colony. It's because it was ruled from Great Britain, and it wasn't connected. It wasn't directly connected to any democratic electorate, and so he had the freedom to. He actually, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. If he'd been, he's the exception that proves the rule. If he had been a typical politician or a tyrant, it would have worked the other way around. So, I'm not advocating for colonization or for rule of that kind. But in this one case, it worked out to the benefit of Hong Kong because there was no populace that had really a political voice. And the truth is, the people who were there the vast majority of them had fled communism. And so they weren't there to complain. They weren't there to say, we want more of a welfare state, or, give us a paradise here. They were really happy to be there and, to not be starving to death. So that worked in his favor too. But really, I think what it boils down to is it was ruled from afar. Great Britain had a policy of benign neglect, which was fantastic. It worked really well. And then they had this one guy who said, yeah, we're going to stick to free market principles. Even when everyone else was arguing against him and saying, no, we need protectionism and we need to all this stuff. And he stuck to it, and it was amazing.
I think there was, I don't know if he was the one who said it, but I think there was one person in Hong Kong who said, well, one thing I did was I outlawed the collection of statistics, because when they don't collect statistics, there's nothing for the social engineers to do.
That sounds like Hepworthwaite. Yeah.
It's, and I just said, well, geez, what would happen if we hadn't had all these, if we hadn't had people keeping all these statistics on diseases or all this other stuff? There's nothing to do, because when you have, you have these people start, that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, Hong Kong was just such a, it's really, when was the last time you were in Hong Kong?
Long time ago. I left, the last time I left was 2000, was summer of 2000. So, and obviously a lot's happened since then. At the time, even after the Chinese takeover, it was still way more free in terms of personal liberty. I hate to say economic liberty because they're the same thing. But in terms of freedom, it was much more free than the US. And probably still is in some ways, but obviously there are ways that it's not now. So
and what I'm hearing too is most of the Hong Kongers would have preferred staying with Britain.
They certainly wanted, they certainly wanted Britain to give them right of abode in England, in Great Britain. That was that, especially after Tiananmen, there was just this massive push for that. People, I think part of it is, if you use the independence word, that was sort of politically taboo. They knew that China wouldn't accept that, and they knew that would be starting a fight they couldn't win. So you didn't really hear people talking about that. But there was definitely concern about the Chinese takeover. And the way most people responded to that was they just got a second passport. They did their time in Canada or the US or Australia. And then, because they didn't want to live in those places, they just wanted to get the second passport and come back and continue living and working in Hong Kong. So I think their actions show that they would have preferred that, but people were really reluctant to say that. People didn't use the independence word. They didn't really talk about trying to not have a handover. I think just because they realized it wasn't realistic, China wasn't gonna allow it. But yeah, everybody was freaked out about China taking over.
And of course at the time, being part of the Commonwealth, it wasn't that hard to go get a citizenship in other British Commonwealth countries, which could have been Canada, could have been New Zealand or Australia or even India or some of those other countries that were a colony at one point, or even Kenya or Tanzania for that matter. But yes.
Yeah, which I don't remember a whole lot of people going for those countries, but Canada was a big one. Canada started tightening up, actually. It used to be that you could basically buy yourself residency and then citizenship if you invested enough, and they really tightened up on that. But even so, I don't know what the numbers are, but so many Hong Kongers by the time of the handover already had their ticket out. So they planned ahead.
Because I think Hong Kong was very much a it makes me wonder too, though. We have independent. We don't have independent Hong Kong, but for some reason we do have independent Singapore, which is, I think, in a lot of ways similar to Hong Kong.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
But it is an independent country. I don't think Singapore is that good on personal liberty, but they're also, but I have heard they're very good on a lot of economic freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, their personal liberty track record's a little tainted. Yeah, and you know, I don't know enough about the history of Singapore, of how it was, you know, how it became independent, but you know, Hong Kong was sort of a product of the Opium Wars, and there was always this sort of stain, this point of pride with the Chinese about having it taken from them, even though when the British took it, it was a nothing place. I mean, it was, you know, they called it a bare chunk of rock out in the ocean. But there was the point of the Chinese pride being hurt. And so they always wanted it back. You know, and now that other, you know, Shanghai and even other places within China are these economic success stories, Hong Kong doesn't stand out as much in the Chinese picture. And so it's understandable that they're, you know, I think they're more willing to sort of crack down on Hong Kong than they were right after the handover, because Hong Kong was a lot more unique back then.
I can imagine it was unique. And yeah, it's always this interesting thing, you know, it's like you go into a neighborhood and you find this broken down house, and you go in, you get the house, you might get the house for peanuts. You buy the house and then you tear it down, and then you build a nice big mansion on it with swimming pools and stuff. And then suddenly everybody else in the neighborhood wants your house. And it's like, well, why didn't you do this yourself if you wanted it so badly? And that's what this sounds like. It's just oh yeah, you build up all this and you're hurting our pride. I don't know what to say about this. It's, you know, also, what wasn't also in Hong Kong, wasn't there? Did you ever go to that, the Walled City?
Yeah, that's one of my regrets, is that I didn't dig into that much more, like really do a lot of writing on it. I visited it, but that was fascinating. That was really a fascinating story, because it was legally no man's land. It wasn't part of the 99-year lease. And it also wasn't part of China. So it was this, you know, ungoverned or self-governed place.
Yeah.
And it was just wild. And it was, I have pictures of it still, because what it looks like is, it wasn't shanties. I mean, it was buildings, but it's like, you know, say there's a block of buildings.
Yeah.
And then someone built another block on top of it, and another block on top of it, and another one, and then something creeping out a little bit. And just, I mean, it's like, you know, it's like someone was playing with Legos, and they just build this structure that's like a rabbit warren inside. I mean, it was wild to see. And on the bottom level, there were these unlicensed dentists who had come from China, but weren't licensed in Hong Kong, but you could go there and get cheap dental work done. I never heard of anybody, you know, having any problems from it. Lots of drug use in there, lots of opium, like little opium den type stuff. But even so, you know, even around the Walled City, very low crime rate, you know, compared to any American city, even at the time, like minimal nominal crime.
Yeah, it was the Kowloon, is that how they call it? The Walled City?
Yeah.
And you had about 50,000 people living on 6.4 acres or 2.6 hectares. So it was a very, very dense population. You said, yeah, it was just like building Legos on top of each other, but you had all these people living their lives, and apparently, there wasn't, it was almost really a closest thing to an anarchist place. And it sounds like, while it wasn't perfect, it functioned pretty well. And you probably had, and you know, this is interesting too, when you're talking about dentists. Well, yeah, but dentists want to have good relations with their customers. So of course they're going to serve their customers. And it's funny,
right?
You have unlicensed dentists that said, well, yeah, you probably had, you probably could have gotten any, I suppose you probably could have gotten any, like codeine or ivermectin or any kind of, probably could have gotten any, drugs without prescriptions too, I suppose. But.
Yeah. Well, to sort of go on a little tangent about that, I really hope that the last few years have sort of shaken up people's belief in licensing, because as you say, doctors, dentists, medical practitioners, they're not in it so that they can harm their customers. They want their customers to keep coming back. And the legal system still allows, if somebody harms you, you can still sue them. You can sue them for malpractice. You can sue them for fraud. All these protections already exist. And I think the idea that, we need licensing in order to protect us from professionals, there's no evidence that it actually does that, by the way. There's no evidence that it produces any better results. And I kind of hope that people are starting to see what it's really all about.
I don't know what they're going to see after all this, Brittany. I really don't. Hong Kong unfortunately decided to evict the Walled City. What happened to all those people who live there? Did they just end up on the street somewhere, or did they?
No. As I remember, and my memory's probably pretty foggy about this, so the government, the Hong Kong government they do have a lot of public housing, and there are reasons for that, and it's dysfunctional. So there are a few areas in Hong Kong, in the Hong Kong economy, where it's not fully free market, and it's just as dysfunctional as you'd expect it to be. But one of the things they do is they have a ton of public housing. And if I remember correctly, they moved those people or they gave them the option of public housing. I couldn't tell you how many took it, or if it was like the same level of public housing as other people had, but that's my recollection.
And of course, who pushed for this? It was just a bunch of socially minded do-gooders who realized, well, we know what's best for them, and we're going to take away their community.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that whole thing shows just how much contempt these do-gooders have for the people that they allegedly want to help.
Well, let me tell you a worse story. So, or not worse, but along the same vein. So one of the things that used to make Hong Kong so special and fun and neat was all the street food. All these people with little carts selling, little noodles and tofu and all kinds of things, seafood, all over the place. And there were some places where it's like, this is sort of the designated street food street. There were others who just, they just kind of went around wherever, and you were supposed to get some kind of permit or license to do it, and a lot of them never did. But while I was there, so this was like last time I was there, like 98 or so, they started cracking down on the street food vendors. There was no reason for it. It wasn't, they said, oh, sanitation and, you can get food poisoning and all this stuff. But they couldn't actually cite any cases of that happening. And there were a couple of cases. There was one case where they were like chasing this lady, this woman who had some kind of street food cart. They were chasing her. And I think this one was a woman. There were several different cases, but there was one where they were chasing someone and the person died. They fell and had a heart attack and died while they were being chased by the food police. There was another case, and I don't remember if this guy died or not, but they had him in court. They charged him with illegal street food vending, and they had him in court, and he was saying, look, this is my livelihood. This is, if I can't do this, I die, I can't do anything else. And they ruled against him, shut down his thing. He set himself on fire in the courtroom. I don't remember if he lived or died, but there were a couple other stories like that were just horrific abuses for no reason. You're coming in and shutting down this thing that is like one of the things that makes Hong Kong so wonderful. And then they started, when I was there also, they started shutting down some of the big, there was like this one big sort of open area that certain nights of the week was like street food night. And you could just go down there and get all this stuff. And it was wonderful. And they shut that down. So it's like, yeah, there's something about, I think, the people who get into those positions and just having those positions at all, it's like they start looking for stuff to tinker with. And they start like, how can I improve? What can I do to make things better? And no, you just don't want those positions to exist at all, because
and I can just imagine what the news media would have said when this guy set himself on fire. It said, "Oh, he's a terrorist. He's a terrorist. He's a terrorist. He's interfering with our democracy." And
well, fortunately, the Hong Kong media wasn't in a lot of ways, actually, even back then. The Hong Kong media was pretty vibrant, and there were enough publications, especially Jimmy Lai's publications, that just told it like it was, and were very upfront about it. And Jimmy Lai, he's actually in prison now, which is also, is a crime. But he was very libertarian. It is very libertarian.
Oh, yeah, Jimmy Lai, yeah.
And so you didn't get that kind of thing. It was really the media back then, the local media was free enough, and it was like a mix of small town, but also this big international center. So you still got these, crazy debates in the letters sections about who's going to pick up the garbage in such and such town and stuff. But while there was a great deal of self-censorship, especially after Tiananmen, about the Chinese government, I would say that the level and sophistication of censorship that we're experiencing now in the US was much, much more, much more here. It's much more sophisticated and much more kind of across the board than it was even then.
Yeah, I can. I mean, this is fascinating. I've regret I never got to see Hong Kong, and I don't think I'd ever. And of course, it's completely China now. I wouldn't go back there. I had one buddy who had the theory that coronavirus was largely a ploy to foil the Hong Kong protests.
I heard that. It certainly worked to that effect.
Yeah,
I don't think that was the whole purpose of it, but it certainly had that effect. Yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds like it was an absolute, you still see that. I think you see a lot of that still in Mexico, where you see people just selling food out on the street. I mean, and in Mexico, you see, and I think that's also I've noticed that's really very healthy, is when you see a lot of these, as I call them, micro businesses.
Yeah.
I mean, a business that you could start with maybe an initial investment of $1,000 or $2,000. Not really, like I remember, I mean, when I'm walking around a neighborhood in Mexico, I see one guy who's just got a little shop and all he does is make keys. Or I see another person who just, or you see these restaurants that maybe are the size of a 2-car garage. You got a few tables, you make a little bit of food, you sell some tacos. And I always loved it.
That stuff is so critical, and it's all over Asia. It's all over a lot of places. And I think people associate it with poorer economies, like with more third world, but that's not really true. I mean, Taiwan was not third world when I was there, and there was street food all over the place. In fact, one of the things people talk about is, you're less worried about losing your job when you know that you can just set up a noodle cart the next morning and have an income. And that's how it is. That's how it was in Taiwan. That's how it was in Hong Kong. It's so easy to set up a business, just like a micro business, and serve some need, do something. And here it's not. I mean, here you lose your job, and anything you might do to try and, lift yourself back up is going to be illegal. And I wrote a paper back it was around the time of the handover, comparing the US to Hong Kong in terms of economic freedom, and also personal freedom. But I focused a lot on economic freedom. And at that time, and I don't remember what the numbers were, but the difference in per capita small businesses in Hong Kong was just off the charts compared to America. You know, we think of America as being this entrepreneurial place, but you know, compared to a place like Hong Kong, I would say probably even Taiwan, even Vietnam, a lot of, you know, former communist countries too. You know, we were nowhere near the number of, you know, people just going out and making it for themselves. And, you know, you feel it when you feel like, you know, the big box companies are kind of running everything, and you've got to have a job working for somebody in order to make ends meet. There's something wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely something wrong. I think we were probably more like this 100 years ago too. I don't know where we are now. It's really having a negative effect on everything. You know, this brings us now to the whole. You know, obviously your dad wasn't alive when all this coronavirus stuff hit. But what would your dad? And you can only speculate. But what would your dad would have thought us? And what do you think of all this? Because
we talk about that all the time, because as his kids, you know, our whole lives we were listening to him say, "It's coming down, it's coming down, it's all coming down. It's just, you know, civilization's crumbling. It's all just," and we would laugh. I mean, we agreed. You know, we didn't think he was wrong, but it was just such hyperbole that it was like we would just laugh at him. And literally, so he passed away at the end of December of 2019. Couple months later, it's all coming down. So he would have, you know, I think it would have infuriated him to such a degree. In some ways, I'm glad he didn't have to. I mean, I'm actually very glad he didn't have to live through all the hospital crap that was going on. I mean, that was just criminal. And I'm glad he didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. I feel like he would have been so infuriated that I don't think he would have known what to do with himself, because, you know, already we were all at the point where it's like we were already like raging at the machine and like, this is untenable, this is criminal, and then this happens and it's like, well, you know, how much worse can it get? And we were in California too, so it was sort of the epicenter of kind of the worst of it in America anyway. You know, I think it's really revealed to anyone who's paying attention, it's revealed how much power the state has over our lives, and that they've always had. They just haven't used it to this extent. And getting back to the licensing thing, to me, it's so clear that the power of licensing had a lot to do with why they were able to get away with what they got away with.
Yeah.
Not only in medicine, you know, you hold that over and they're doing it. You hold that over the medical practitioners and say, well, we're going to take away your career, your right to practice, the thing you trained for and lived your whole life for. We're going to take that away because we can, if you don't shut up about what you think about ivermectin or where the virus came from or the vaccines. But also just small businesses. I mean, you know, overnight, businesses in California were ordered to shut down. And, you know, we saw businesses we loved shut down forever because, you know, how long can you do that for? And the reason they can do it is because the city licenses the business. And if you don't toe the line, and what that means really is it's not just that you have to follow the law, you have to follow the whims of those people sitting in the city council meetings every Tuesday night. And whatever they say, you know, if the governor sends down an illegal order that's not constitutional, that's not backed up in law anywhere, and your city council says, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea, you guys all have to shut down and wear masks in your sleep and all this stuff, they've got to do it or they lose their livelihood. And I really think people need to realize licensing is a big piece. It's a really important piece of where they get their power. And that's something we need to go after. It's something we need to, and there are ways to get around it. There are things you can do where you don't have to be licensed, but people need to know about that. And they need to know that this is why they're able to do things that you shouldn't be able to do in a free country, that the Constitution says they can't do. Well, they can because they've got this power that they granted themselves, and we need to understand that.
And you know, the other thing too, though, is licensing and all of this stuff is something that really happens at the local level. It's not at the federal level. I mean,
Yeah.
you're practicing law. It's usually at the state level or at even the local level. And there's one doctor I know who I met him in 2017, was all about, getting rid of Mexico licensing. He was going to write a book about the white coat cartels.
Nice.
And all of this stuff. And then in 2020, completely sold out.
Wow. Can you say his name?
I don't want to say his name on here.
Okay.
I'll say his name in the chat. Because there's still a part of me that wonders
what happened.
Has this, and I flat out asked him the last time I talked to him on the phone. I said, "Did somebody threaten you?" I asked him, and because I don't put anything past these people anymore.
No.
I don't think they would. I don't think they would, if they did something that ended up killing off 1 billion people. I don't think they would care.
Well,
I don't think they would care at all. This brings me. I don't. If you're familiar with Ayn Rand's essay, "The Roots of War," it brings me to this. Mm-hmm. So long as men are subjugated by force, they will fight back and use any weapons available. If a man is led to a Nazi gas chamber or a Soviet firing squad with no voices raised to defend him, would he feel any love or concern for the survival of mankind? Or would he be more justified in feeling that a cannibalistic mankind, which tolerates dictatorships, does not deserve to survive? That's what Ayn Rand wrote in The Roots of War. I've been thinking about that essay so much during the last 3 years.
I need to read that. I don't think I've ever read that.
Yeah, it's just one paragraph, but so long. Yeah, it's Ayn Rand, Roots of War. It appeared in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and some of her other publications. I hope that's it's Ayn Rand's words, not mine. So
yeah.
I cut and paste it for you. Yeah.
And,
it's just, and I don't know about you, but the reaction to this wasn't really that surprising to me. Because I saw what happened in September of 2001.
Yep.
I think a lot of libertarians swallowed the black pill in March of 2020, but I swallowed it really back in September of 2001.
Yeah, that was the turning point for me too. And I think probably for me, it was a little bit different because I had just come back from, over a decade in Asia.
Yeah.
And not just, but like a year previous. And so my point of reference, I feel like everyone else was here being boiled alive, being the frog being boiled. And to me, it was night and day when 9/11 happened. And everything that came after that, like you, I was like, this is a different world, that we're suddenly living in totalitarianville. And maybe because I hadn't been living here all that time and I wasn't being slowly boiled along with everyone else, I don't know. But yeah, that to me, that's the point as well. That's the point in history where it's like things really started going down. Not that they were great before, but yeah.
It was the realization that they don't, Gary Johnson used to have that line, everybody's a libertarian, they just don't know it yet. It's no. And now it's everybody's an authoritarian, they just don't know it yet.
Yep.
It's and I don't think everybody's an authoritarian. I don't think but I'm now much more of the attitude that some of these individuals want to live in a slaughterhouse. Let them have their slaughterhouse and just build and just do what you can to defend yourself so their slaughterhouse doesn't come to yours. And I know lots of great Russians. Guess what? They're not in Russia anymore. I mean, the Russians want to have their slaughterhouse. China wants to have a slaughterhouse. Let them have a slaughterhouse, but just let the people who don't want to live in a slaughterhouse get out.
Yeah, well, that's the trick, isn't it? How do how do we protect ourselves
Yeah.
from those people and from the systems that they support and enable? How do we? That's the big question. Yeah.
The ideal is that they'll generally fight over what kind of slaughterhouse they want to live in. You know, Shiites versus Sunnis are a good example. I mean, they both want to have a slaughterhouse. You know, they both want to have a religion of violence and subjugation and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Let them fight each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other positive thing is this whole system that they've got going, the more centralized it becomes and the more tyrannical, it's not sustainable. I mean, even just the financial system we're seeing right now, again, what we've predicted for years and years, it's going to fall in on itself. It's not sustainable. So, can humanity wait until it tumbles? Hopefully yes, but
well, you do have to ask yourself, is socialism ever going to die? I mean, I don't know if it is. I really don't. We're going to have these corrupt college professors who keep promoting it. And we're going to have plenty of parasites who just want it to get it for their own purposes. And I think probably the main villains are the academics, really. But
the good news though is that I think academia is crumbling. People are seeing it for the first. It's gotten to the point where it's such a clown show.
Yeah.
That nobody wants to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to send their kid to be indoctrinated and treated to, Maoist cultural shaming sessions. And, people are recognizing it for what it is. And especially with all the resources there are outside of the university system. I mean, you can get all of MIT's curriculum online now, yeah. I think for free.
Yeah.
So that's not going to last.
I think that might be the one thing that got exposed during COVID is I think the general public now realizes just how corrupt these individuals are. I don't think they realize. I think there was generally, and I hope this doesn't turn into the masses all hating all smart people, but this is a case where the allegedly smart people really did a lot of damage to the world. And I mean, I'm at a point, where I'd probably trust somebody with a high school degree more than I'd trust somebody with a PhD.
I'd trust any random crack addict on any random street in any random city before your average PhD or media spokesperson. Yeah.
And I would certainly trust somebody with and even a long time ago, I had this attitude of always vote against the Ivy Leaguer except for Brown.
Except for Brown.
Yeah.
Oh, Brown University?
Yeah. That was my attitude, except for Brown. Yeah.
Well, my friend Todd Seavey, who went to Brown, would probably disagree with you there because he fought his own battles there.
I've noticed. I always noticed that the people from Brown were a little more they just wanted to write novels or be actors or.
There was something about
they didn't really want to take. They did. Whereas Harvard and Yale, they want to rule the world, but at Brown, it seemed like they were just more about just being creative and stuff like that. So that's why I make the exception for Brown.
Yeah, there are a couple universities, and Brown is one of them where it's I've met enough people from there where it's like, wait, they're doing something right there. It's cool people coming out of here who are really thoughtful and thinking independently. They're not just. It's not the machine like at Harvard or Yale. So yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Brown seems to be the outlier, but I don't know people from all the, and to his credit, Tom Woods got most of his papers at those schools. So he's one recent exception.
Yeah. But I do think it's, as my dad said, it's coming down. I do think the whole university system is changing. I mean, we've got a teenage son and we're looking at that and it's like, well, you're super smart. And what is the pathway now? What are the pathways? What do you do when, you've got a kid who's really smart, can go far. I don't want him in that ideological swamp.
I know, with all the resources you have today too, is first of all, one thing I'd encourage him to do, get a second language, and you can certainly acquire it online nowadays. Number one,
Yeah.
get a second language. Number two, encourage him to be entrepreneurial as much as you can.
Yep. Yeah. And he's
Get
not
them to
done
go
all of
after
it.
things, and it's unfortunate, but the one thing that I think I hope it gets easier, but it's very difficult to build a network without college.
Yeah.
I mean, I was reading this study about joining fraternities, and it basically said that if you join a fraternity, your grade point average will drop 0.25 on average. But guess what? Guess what happens to these fraternity members? They end up making more money. Oh, he was in Alpha Phi Alpha. Sure, we'll hire this guy.
Right. Right.
Or whatever. It's just,
Yeah.
hey, Alpha Phi. I know a lot of great guys out of Alpha Phi Alpha. I want to qualify that. So yeah, that was a good frat. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that whole thing, I mean, that's a really good point. The connections you make in the networking, I just feel like that's got to be that whole the way that you find those networks and even the networks themselves have got to be changing dramatically now. It's like I can't imagine that 10 years from now it's going to be the same pathway, that it's going to be, okay, you go to college, you meet, you get plugged into your networks. I can't imagine that's going to continue to be seen as the best way to develop your mind. But even to make connections within the world, I just feel like there are new networks coming up and we need to pay attention to those and new ways of doing things. And I don't know what they are, but it's an exciting time.
Yeah, the reason why I said learn a second language is because of how anti-male this culture is becoming, and I certainly think about leaving America a lot. But
where would you go?
I might go to Mexico.
A lot of people are doing that.
I absolutely positively loved Saccart Velo when I went there last August. That's what they call it, but we call it Georgia.
Okay.
And, but also, and maybe part of the reason was the first time I went to any kind of liberty event that was about half and half male and female. And
interesting.
There seemed to be I think because some of these countries had to endure socialism that they'd never really had it, and it was always something that they saw as coming from the outside. They didn't want it, and they still have some traditions there. The biggest problem is that I think some of them are getting closer to Europe, and I don't want to see them get closer to Europe. I don't want to see them. I hope they can kind of go their own way.
Yeah.
I don't want to see, although I also think they kind of see it this way. Well, we don't want to be allied with the Russians. On several occasions, people said to me, "Oh, Georgia and Russia." I said, "No, they are not Russians." But they see it almost as if, well, we're safer palling up with the EU, and I think the EU is a complete disaster. I think in some cases, I think they're worse. In fact, I don't know. Did you see that recent tweet? Do you probably know who Melissa Chen is, right?
I don't know.
She's a intellectual. She's actually from Hong Kong. I think she's from Hong Kong. No, she's from Singapore. That's right. But she sent out this tweet. He says, it used to be over here that people admired America, but now they think America's going crazy. And it's because now, we want to turn all our boys into girls. I mean, I don't know.
Well, the way I see it is it's gotten to the point now where you really can't, and I know people do it, but you can't with any credibility deny how crazy it's gotten. You can't defend the stuff that's the whole trans movement and pushing that on kids and the surgeries and the drag shows for all that stuff. You lose credibility if you try and say that's not nuts. And so I feel like culturally we've gotten to this point where something's got to give. And I don't necessarily mean a swing in the other direction where now we become this, right wing, religious right kind of thing. But something's got to break, something's got to give. And so I feel like, I'm optimistic about it in that, sit back and watch these people destroy themselves, watch this ideology destroy itself, and meanwhile be building up the alternative. Because who thinks that's the basis for a thriving civilization or society or even species? Who thinks that's going to work?
That's true, but you've got to build something up to replace it. And I don't know what's going to replace it. And it kind of scares me because I don't really have a whole lot of faith in the average person on the street either.
Well, there are people
because I've seen what they've been willing to fall for.
Yeah. There are definitely people building community and building alternative. That's what my Substack group is all about, is building parallel solutions. And there's a lot of it going on. There are a lot of people building alternatives in healthcare, in food independence, in all these areas that seem to be falling apart. But they're the minority. It's not gonna be the majority that fixes this. The majority is gonna, I think we've learned over the last 3 years. I never had a lot of faith in the majority of humanity, but even so, this has been like a kick in the teeth. Like, to see just how craven and how easily people went along with this stuff and supported it. And it's like every totalitarian disaster in history, we don't get to wonder how it happened anymore. It's like, it's right in front of us. This is how it happens. You people believe anything the government tells you, anything the people on TV tell you, you believe it, and you go out and you hound your neighbors about it, and you attack your neighbors for not believing the TV. It's so I have no faith in the majority either, but I do believe in the remnant. And I do believe that there are enough of us, minority as we may be, small in number as we may be, there are enough of us to rebuild a foundation that's going to be there when this other crap comes tumbling down.
That'll be very interesting. Another thing about your teenager, you might want to encourage him to get into crypto.
I have been. It's not really his thing, but I keep kind of, you can't push him too much, because then it's like they have to push back. But I keep mentioning it from time to time. Yeah, absolutely. And that may be the thing that saves us. Who knows?
It's one thing that gives me hope, and I think it's one of the things that's resulted from all this. And I'm also looking at how our movement has evolved. And I'm starting to wonder if there's something about the structure of nonprofit organizations that seems to make them essentially ineffective. Everything in crypto is a business.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a good chance they might actually end up accomplishing more for liberty than any nonprofits are. As somebody who's, grown up in the movement, seen the movement, you're kind of wondering, it's like, why haven't we made any progress here? It's, and I think COVID kind of showed that everybody that our movement has failed. We haven't changed minds. We haven't changed the culture. We haven't even held back the tide any. You can go back to the 60s when the total federal debt was maybe what, a quarter of $1 trillion or something like that.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah. And I didn't want to make this a depressing show, but
No, but I think we need to acknowledge that. I think the movement has done a lot in the intellectual realm. There's a whole body of work now that we can point to and say, look, here's why socialized medicine is a disaster. Here's why socialism is a disaster. So that's all there, and I don't want to detract from how incredibly valuable that is. But I think what a lot of libertarians don't like to acknowledge is that most people don't make decisions about what they believe or what they support based on logic or, an examination of the facts, or certainly not an examination of someone else's opinion. It's really not, I don't want to denigrate the intellectual battle, but this isn't going to be won on the intellectual battle.
Yeah.
It's not going to be won by books and papers. And I love those books and papers, and I think they're important to have, but that's not how you change the mind of someone who is emotionally sucked in to loving the state for whatever reason.
Yeah. I think some of the intellectual work works to at least keep us motivated and keep us reminding us of what is important. But, we haven't talked about this, but as Jeff Tucker has talked about, look at all these so-called libertarians who completely sold out in 2020.
Yep.
And I don't know.
Yep.
I do think to a certain in a way they really didn't. I didn't have that high expectations for them, but they certainly could have. They certainly could have stood against this, and they were very timid about it.
Here's the biggest status takeover of our lives in our history, and so many of them were either silent or apologizing for it. I mean,
yeah, and they would still talk about things like like FDA approvals and stuff like that, the things that they were talking about before, but they,
tangential stuff.
Yeah. And, I still, I know also for me, that was the entire reason why I was totally behind Angela McArdle in 2022, was that alone, because she was out leading all these protests. And I said, and there were a lot of people in the Libertarian Party who didn't think that was an issue. And sadly, I think some of them probably didn't like her for it. And I was just kind of like, wow, why are you here?
Right. What's the point?
What attracted you to libertarianism if you think this is okay? It's what,
right.
I don't know. It was
has anyone, I know Jeff Tucker and some other people have sort of been pointing this out, but has anyone opened a dialogue with any of these folks and said, hey, what was going on in your head, and why'd you take the position you took, or why, didn't you take any position, or have they explained themselves at all?
I don't think any, I think they're just trying to pretend that it never happened.
Along with Fauci and Walensky and
the last time I saw Yaron Brook, of the Ayn Rand Institute, it just seemed like he was trying to pretend. And I hate saying it, but ARI was one organization that didn't disappoint me because my expectations were so low about them. This is something else that bothers me. We've got somebody like ARI who's pro-reason but anti-liberty. And then we've got some of these people in the Libertarian Party who are pro-liberty but anti-reason. I really hate this. I would love to. Where is a pro-reason and pro-liberty movement? I don't see much of. I don't see a lot of it.
What I've seen over
both sides.
I'm sorry.
It's hurting both sides.
Yeah, well, I think in the libertarian circles, as everywhere else, I think people have substituted. For reason, they've substituted any position that science by authority. So, and I've noticed this for years. This didn't just crop up with COVID, but you'll have people who call themselves skeptics or science-minded, or they who profess to rule their lives by reason. But what it often ends up being is, well, the experts say da 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 da. And they've never examined what the experts say. And so I think the whole argument by authority and trusting the experts, I think it's infected libertarianism too, and including the branches of libertarianism that profess to be all about reason. They're just as guilty of this whole science by consensus and believing what the people in authority say as the non-libertarians.
Yeah, I don't know where this. Yeah, it's really odd to see how this works out. But there's this whole attitude that somehow these. I'm gonna talk to some people about this because we're all kind of. There are a lot of people who are fans of Rand who are just wondering how this happened, and I don't really know what to explain about it. It's and I'm almost afraid too to say that I think some of them that maybe for some of them, to his credit, Ron Paul spoke truth about all this. People at the Mises Institute spoke truth about all this, and we're always on the right side.
Yep.
I'm afraid that some of them might have just they just almost because there's almost a Ron Paul derangement syndrome now.
Yes.
Going on.
And there was before COVID. Yeah.
I don't deify Ron Paul either, and I think there's a lot of people. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people, who deify Ron Paul, which I think is just as big a mistake. But it seems like, and I wasn't really aware of this Ron Paul derangement syndrome, but now there's definitely, and it's almost as if this is their way. They saw this as their way to own Ron Paul, and well, guess what? You screwed up again. And if you just, it never dawned on me that.
Well, there's
people aren't ideological. They don't attach themselves to ideas. They attach themselves to people, and then take
what's tribal. It's tribal.
It's crazy. It's really crazy to see that.
Yeah, and it's for a long time, there's been this rift between the Mises folks and the Beltway folks, the Cato and Mises rift. And I know people on both sides of that. I count myself on the Mises tribe, although I think there are some wonderful people at Cato, and there's some wonderful people on that side. I have read a lot about how that whole thing started and, kicking Murray Rothbard out and all that stuff. To this day, I still don't understand the roots of that rift. It seems so emotional and so irrational to me. I know there's a story there that I don't know about, but that rift has been there a long time. And the way I see it is there are these groups. There's Ron Paul, there's the Mises Institute, there's Jeff Tucker, there's pretty much every brownstone now, who have been unerringly standing up for liberty all the time, every time, no matter what. And then there are these other groups that call themselves libertarian. And for some reason, over the years, they've had this animosity for the Mises Institute, for Ron Paul. And so it just makes me wonder, what is actually going on there? And I don't know. Again, I think there's a lot going on that I am not privy to, but there's been weird animosity between those two camps.
Yeah, I don't know where, and I don't think it's helped, but back when I was at Liberty in the 90s, we all definitely would have considered Cato more libertarian than Mises, and I
wow.
don't think any of us feel that now.
Wow, no, you can't. I mean,
not after COVID.
No,
I don't know if there's also this whole attitude of trying to look respectable in among the establishment, and
right.
Maybe if you try to gain respectability, some of your ideas will be heard. But I don't think that works at all. And in fact, I think it's going to fail. And I don't. It's interesting too because I don't. The other thing too is I've pointed out about some of the Beltway crowd. I don't see much interest in crypto there. They don't. They kind of ignore it.
Interesting.
Which I think and people in the crypto scene are definitely aware of Rothbard and Mises to a certain extent. People like the anarcho-polko crowd, they're definitely more sympathetic to Ron Paul. I mean, it's interesting to see in spite of all the Coke money that I don't and Ted Galen Carpenter just left. I
saw that. Yeah.
So I don't know. I still have some people I like there too. It's but I don't know. I also know too. It's very hard to make a living as a libertarian. mean, usually it's a sideline or it's something where you're
Right.
selling it to a certain extent. I mean, it's not easy to do that and make a living at it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sadly true. So I imagine if you get in with a think tank or, something that, you want to hang on to that and, probably also just sort of get sucked up in that culture of the whole, trying to be respectable to these cretins.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I don't.
Yeah. And I do think there are times though when we, when the liberty movement does shoot itself in the foot, it's a, and sometimes, just, having run a podcast, and doing 50 shows, it's like, I remember, and these things don't come down to ideology, but I remember who was ready to go on time. I remember who wasn't ready to go and things like that. And those, and, and that's something, too, when I went to, national, I just thought, that was something in my head though. Am I voting for somebody who's going to show up on time for the meetings, or am I voting for somebody who's going to be always late for the meetings? That's important.
Yeah.
It's and some libertarians don't. Some libertarians almost see being disorganized as some kind of virtue.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. That's the culture I grew up in. One day I'll write a novel or some short stories about, those days in the supper clubs and everything, because there's an element to it that's just comical. There's an element to it where it's just these guys with great ideas, some of them very learned, fantastic people, but who can't find their car keys and who just, all this stuff. And it's typical. It's like, it was a whole character, and it's not like that. Libertarianism has grown so much now. It encompasses so much more than that. But there was a time when it was like, that was the culture. It was these geeky guys mostly guys, some women, but who kind of took pride in not being at all organized and you kind of living in chaos. And my dad was that way in some ways. He refused to label his videos. This is back in the day, before DVDs. He refused to label his, and I'm just like, Dad, I can help you. I can organize this for you. No, I don't want. So yeah, totally a part of the at least old school libertarian psyche, is, and it's not helpful. It's not, it's cute, but yeah, we can kind of get past that, I think.
Yeah, I hope we can get past that too. I'd really like to know some of the history of what's happened here with some people. I can say I've heard negative things about Rothbard from one person. I don't know what you heard, but
I've heard occasional things, nothing damning, but he could be. I don't think he was. I don't think he was censored himself much, and so he definitely said things over the years that offended people, but I've never heard anything that made me think, oh, he's not who I thought he was, or what a horrible person, anything like that. It's like, well, yeah, the guy, he didn't edit himself. He spoke very freely, he wrote very freely, and I know he offended some people, and even on a personal level said things that were personally hurtful to people, but so have I, and I think so has anyone who speaks openly.
I find a lot of people who call themselves libertarians are they're not very good with any kind of criticism, and that can mean if you even point out a spelling error in a press release or something like that. I don't. Yeah. It's I don't know what to say about all that. It's I hope we can maybe. Do you think there's maybe I would love to see somebody. I wish we could get somebody like a Tony Robbins in this movement. What can we do to get somebody like that? Because that's somebody who would take the movement a long way.
I think Tom Woods does a lot in that direction, because he's brought in, his whole, he's all about kind of getting past the intellectual phase and like helping people to like become financially independent, for one thing, but be successful in their lives. So I'm thinking about his relationship with like Stu McLaren, who's this really amazingly inspirational guy who's teaching people how to do memberships. And Tom does a ton of stuff like that. I feel like he's on to something in that direction. He's definitely on to something where it's like, okay, we're not, we're all on board with all the books and the articles and everything, but how can you live your life independently according to your ideals, not be beholden to some corporation, have real freedom in your own life. What do you need? And so that's a whole different level. That's kind of the opposite of what libertarianism was when I was growing up. When I was growing up, it was all about, well, let's gather at Marie Callender's and complain about the world in, really fascinating terms and with a lot of intellect to back it up. But there's a whole new approach. I think Tom Woods is really tapping into that, the need to bring our philosophy into the world and in a way that makes our own personal lives better.
I think there's a lot of men in what you might call the men's movement or the red pill movement that are doing that right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know how genuine it is though, because there's a lot of grift in the self-help industry.
Always has been. Yeah.
Yeah, there always has been. I mean,
well, okay, let me tell you a story. So, because I think it's always been that way. And I've done a bunch of different things, and I won't mention names, but when I was living in New York, I was studying with some Buddhists and just, studying some specific, well, I won't go into the details, but there was this Buddhist group, and it was led by this guy who was a really accomplished Tibetan monk. He was American, but he was he had lived in Tibet and, risen to the top and just all kinds of whatever, the awards that monks, not awards, but like titles. He had these titles. And there was a lot to learn there. And the people who had studied with him, there was a lot to learn there. It was fascinating. And, I learned a lot from it. There was later, a few years later, I learned that group had really fallen apart. There'd been this, again, I don't want to like go into details or names or anything, but there was a newspaper article I can talk about where the guy, this monk, had been, so basically his partner / girlfriend had left him to go be with somebody else, and he was seen like drunk and going crazy on the dance floor in New York City clubs. And it didn't take anything away from what I had learned from those people. And I think, and I wouldn't say they were grifters. They were not grifters. I think these were sincere people who really had put a lot of study and time and effort into what they were studying and had a lot to offer, and who then kind of had this falling apart that happened. But I think it's always on us to use our discernment and to take what people have to offer. And you might learn something from it. You might not. I think it kind of becomes apparent pretty quickly when someone's just bullshitting. I think, or when there's not really a depth of knowledge there. I think you might have to sort of kiss a lot of frogs, but you'll find the ones that have something to offer. So I'm not too worried about that. I think that the danger is that people want to kind of turn someone into a guru, or, worship somebody and say, oh, this person has all the answers. No, but that doesn't mean you can't learn from them, you know?
Yes, and sometimes you can stick around with a guru way too long. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
going to be very interesting. So, you know, you wrote. I first noticed you when you wrote that article a few years ago about said this seems like 1989. Uh,
Oh
does it
yeah.
still seem like 1989 right now, or
It doesn't. um, yeah, I've thought about that because there was a period, and I'm trying to remember when that was. I'm thinking that was like late 2020, where it felt like, yeah, people are really coming together over this, and they're thinking outside the box. This old system is dying. We're sort of seeing in Technicolor just how corrupt and horrible and broken and dysfunctional the system is, and yay us, you know, we're gonna forge ahead and bring it down. um I think what's happened is, at least just from what I'm seeing in my own circles, is that sort of euphoria. I'm not really feeling that right now, but I am connected with individuals and groups who are working, like who are doing things in the real world to build out solutions to help people create food independence, to um, create PMA clinics and hospitals and ways for doctors to get around all that licensing crap. So I'm working with people now on the stuff that takes hard work, and that's like, oh, okay, now this is, you know, this is the stuff we need to be doing. So it's not that euphoric, but and you know, that I think when I felt that at the time, it was like this sense that, you know, when the Berlin Wall came down, it was boom. At least, you know, from the point that people started crossing the border in Hungary, and then it was what, a few months. It was fast. It just happened, and it was so exciting. But then there was the hard work of like, how do we reunite these countries and all this stuff. I feel like the euphoria was justified, but I'm not in a euphoric frame of mind right now. I'm more in the nuts and bolts. Let's get working. Let's build what needs to be built. And that's just, a lot of that is just, you know, lots of conversations and lots of networking and lots of work and lots of boring stuff. It's not as exciting as sitting on top of the Berlin Wall.
it's definitely not like sitting on top of the Berlin Wall. And we haven't gotten to that point where we're, you know, worrying about riot police or things like that. I mean, I know other people who have been fighting for their lives as activists. That's, you know, where do you think we're going to go with the whole? What's going to happen with Russia right now? I mean, did you imagine that we'd be, you know, back when that happened? Did you imagine that we'd be back in?
No.
Back, that they didn't. The America didn't want the Cold War to end.
Yep. Well, it was a business model for them. It was like the war in Afghanistan. That's what empire runs on, is conflict.
Yeah, and you know, but at least before the World Trade Center, we were actually having budget surpluses for a while. I think the country could have been salvaged then, but I've now gotten to that point, you know, where you're at the vet, your dog is blind, deaf, has lost one leg, and now the vet says your dog has cancer. So what do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think maybe we had to get to this point in order for real change to happen. You know, for so long, even after 9/11, which to me, that was the big shocker, that so many people were comfortable with what happened after 9/11. Oh yeah, I'll you know, let you go through all my stuff and molest me and get on an airplane, and that people were okay with that. It had to get a lot worse. And even now, you know, that they're okay with being locked in their homes and having masks forced on. I mean, it's like, I think what we've learned is that there's a whole section of the population that is okay with whatever the government does. There's no limit to what they will justify. And I think that's good information for us to have, that there's a bunch of people out there for whom there is no limit to legitimate government interference in our lives. And so
Yeah.
there's no point. There's no point talking with them. There's no point arguing with them. That's not going to get you anywhere. Just understand that there's a bunch of people like that. And we've got to sort of move on. But even within those of us who recognize that something's wrong, even within our people, I think it had to get worse. It had to, we weren't taking action. We weren't doing whatever we needed to do to bring this down and to create something new. I think it had to get this bad. Maybe I'm wrong.
Isn't that kind of a shame that it had to get this bad? I mean,
it really is.
It's somebody doesn't go to the doctor when they have stage 1 cancer, but they go to the doctor when they have stage 4 cancer. And really, I don't know what that says. I mean, what does any of this say about the species in general?
Well, I think one thing is,
like Jordan Peterson said, why do we allow this?
Yeah. I think we get very comfortable with what's not killing us immediately. I think we as a species, if we go a generation or two without having a Pol Pot or Mao directly in our lives, we start to see that as, something that happened in history to other people and couldn't possibly happen to me here. I think we're not really intellectual beings. We make our view of the world and our beliefs based on, animal things like, did I survive today? Okay, I survived today, therefore whatever the government's doing must be okay. I think there's just stuff happening on such a base level as far as decision making and as far as what people believe about the world around them, that arguing with them about it, intellectualizing about it, doesn't reach that sort of emotional point of believing things are okay when they're not.
Yeah, as you said, believing things that are okay when they're not. Yeah, maybe I do sometimes wonder if there's because we've gotten so rich now that we can afford to have a class of busybodies who do nothing, who go around and look for problems to solve, and it also seems like we're rich enough now that we can afford a lot more war.
Well, here's the thing, though. The only reason they can afford war is that they can take our money without our consent through taxes and through inflation. And so if we can take that away from them, if we can even forget taxes, if we can just take away their power to control money, if they can no longer inflate the money that people are using in their daily lives, that takes a big piece of what gives them power away. And really, I mean, when you look at look at our recent history, starting around World War I and when countries started going off the gold standard, to me, it's just kind of accelerated the whole the resources going towards empire has accelerated since that point. And the rest of us have gotten richer too. But if they didn't have that control over money and the ability to take money from us without our consent, they wouldn't be able to do any of this.
Well, yeah, but the fact is I think a large majority of people do consent to all this, whether they say it or not. That's the problem. I'm much more optimistic about things like the Free State Project. There's also Monte Libero, which is in Montenegro, which is actually attracting a lot of Russians.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's a few others going on. I think a lot of crypto. Sometimes I think crypto might be the best hope because I don't know. A lot of the people who are doing this, I don't know if I'd want to put them in jail, but for example, Bill Gates, just take everything from him. I mean, leave him maybe leave him with a car and $5,000 and 3 weeks worth of clothes, but otherwise just just take everything else. Make him go out and get a real job, whether it be working at McDonald's or whatever. That would be enough. That would be enough punishment for them.
Yeah, pay off the families of the people he's murdered.
And there's a lot of others out there. Just take them and put them in a place where where they have no power. I mean,
well, and that's the thing. We've been living under this system where the people who have power and I don't just mean political power, but who have the resources because they have the power, the people who have power and resources are the ones who are not accountable to anybody. And so we have this and that's what government is. Government is a system of no accountability because there's nobody to hold government accountable. And I think that's what, I get that, probably most people don't realize that, but it's becoming more and more clear. If you just sort of, look at the world around you, that's the whole problem, is that there is no accountability. And so we're living in this system where decisions are being made by people who don't pay the price of their actions.
Yeah.
And that system, that's not sustainable. That's what we need. We just need to live in a system that's based on accountability.
Yeah.
Where if you commit a crime, if you commit a crime against humanity, you pay for that. And yeah, I agree. Just take through a lawful process, but take everything they have and compensate their victims, compensate all the families of children who died in Africa because of the lockdowns.
Oh yeah. Don't give me, I know a lady from Lesotho. She said all these policies are genocide because it's going to cause worldwide poverty and lead to starvation.
Absolutely.
The misery always falls to the bottom. It didn't even hit America. I knew how it hit people in Peru, which, and when I went to Peru, I saw what poverty really looks like. I suppose you've probably been to some places where you saw what poverty really looks like.
Yeah, if
you haven't left America, you don't know what it looks like.
Absolutely.
And I'm from West Virginia. So yeah. And I'm like, no, okay. I thought I saw it in West Virginia. No, I see it here in Peru now.
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know, after Peru, maybe Colombia, maybe Armenia. It's hard to say. I did see a lot of, there are some places but I think sometimes I think some of these places, there's a little hope for some of these places because they're not as wired as some of these other places, Yeah. I mean, Mexico is still very much a cash society.
Nice.
Still a lot of people, who are unbanked and, but you go to places like that where it's still very much cash.
Well, and it's funny what poverty does because I saw this in places in Asia where once the government got off people's back and just got out of their way, people started doing amazingly creative things, like in Shanghai and Vietnam, places that had been, genuinely poor, really poor people. They came up with, they got very creative about, starting a restaurant wherever, like in your living room or out on the street, a little barber shop, whatever. And I feel like we're in America, we've really kind of lost that spirit a lot, or maybe it's just that it's, suppressed because of all the regulation. But I feel like, people who are coming from poverty, it's like they're looking for opportunities. They're looking for a way to put food on their table that night. And they're going to get really creative. And I look around in America and I don't see that kind of thinking very much. But again, maybe it's just because it's not allowed or because, because setting up little businesses on your own have to be approved by the state and all of that.
I think it's maybe just this. I think in some ways there's a culture of resignation here that's taking place, but I also, if you've listened to some things, about what Peter Thiel says, we've outlawed technology, and he's I think to a certain extent he's right. He pointed out, he would point out things like how fast they were able to build the Golden Gate Bridge versus how long it would take to do something like that now.
Huh.
And it's just getting harder to do these things. And I don't know. I've said to a lot of people in the crypto space, do what Roger Ver did. Roger Ver, VER, he's the founder of Bitcoin Cash. I said, go. He gave up his citizenship and he's doing crypto stuff abroad. And I think that's, I tell the crypto community that, and this way you won't even try to comply with these regulations and just undercut it from abroad. And I've also learned that some of these smaller countries can rise and fall a lot faster. I don't know what you saw in Thailand. Thailand, of course, it has to be an interesting experience all itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much going on there too that's not really part of official government policy. Yeah. And it's just, I mean, organized crime there and the drug trade and everything just dominates so much of what's going on there. But yeah, Vietnam is a good example. They were able to very quickly implement once they saw, China, to its credit, implemented economic reforms, but it took a long time, and there were factions in China that didn't want it to happen and all this stuff. I do think that because Vietnam was smaller, they were able to do it more quickly, which true for any small country, as long as it's sort of not dependent on a bigger country, as long as it's not like dependent on aid from some bigger country.
That's one thing, smaller countries, it's hard when you're a smaller country to have your own industrial base. I mean, I've heard people say that about New Zealand, you have to import washers, import dryers, import microwave ovens because it's such a small country. It's
yeah.
And I don't know how that works out. And I'm largely more and more realizing that the only thing that restrains violence is the possible consequences that come from violence.
I mean, ultimately, yeah.
I think for most, there are no moral considerations anymore. It's like, well, can get it. Well, we think we can get away with attacking Ukraine, so we'll attack Ukraine. Or we're vaccinated and we want to genocide everybody who's unvaccinated. There are too many of them. We can't do it.
I mean, look at Naomi Wolf's reporting on the Pfizer data. It's chilling. It's like they knew this was going to kill babies. They knew it was going to cause miscarriages. They knew.
That's the thing. Scary thing now is, I thought they might have had some constraints on them, but this point, I don't think they would care if they killed 2 or 3 billion people. I don't think they care.
Yeah. And even for us, even for those of us who have never put any faith at all in government or government actors.
Yes.
Even for us, I think it's hard to wrap your head around that. It's hard hard to really believe that. It's hard to believe it.
I should go on record here, by the way. The day after my 11th birthday, I was walking on a railroad track and I was slightly bit by a dog that we never found. On Monday, I was at the doctor, got the first one, got 3 that day, got fourth day, got another one. Next week, got another one. Week later, got another one. 2 weeks later, got another one. Would I do that again? Yes, I would. So I'm not anti-vax.
Right. Well, it's like Robert.
I got the rabies shots. That's my whole point.
And was that when they did it in the stomach?
No. Okay. They had just stopped doing it in the stomach. The first day it was one in the ass, one in the arm, and one on where the bite was.
Okay.
After that, they were all in the arm. Yeah, it's funny. People still ask, did they do it in the stomach? This was 40 years ago, and they weren't.
Wow.
Yeah, but I always wondered, why did they ever do shots in the stomach? But oh well, yeah, they don't. Yeah, they've come a long way, but yeah, I would do the rabies shots again.
Right. If there's a reason for it,
if there's a reason, yeah.
if you do the cost benefit analysis and it makes sense to do it,
Yes,
and do it. It's like, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is always saying, I fought against mercury in fish for decades, and nobody ever called me anti-fish. Acknowledging that a product has problems doesn't mean that you have to reject that product entirely.
Yes, I know. It's so interesting too. It's I don't know where some of this convoluted logic comes from. Yeah, and I do think it's ridiculous. I do think it's ridiculous though when you have this attitude: all vaccines bad, all vaccines good. I mean, the rabies vaccine. Well, that's at least what 80 years. That's been around at least 80 years. So I think we're pretty safe with that.
Although the more I learn about the history of, I could go into all kinds of stories about this, but the more I learn about vaccines, I used to think, oh yeah, smallpox, that was probably a good, no, that was a fraud and it killed a lot of people. So yeah, I think the anti-vaxxer term and the divisiveness there, I think it's completely a product of the pharmaceutical companies and they've been cultivating this narrative for a lot longer than I thought they had. I mean, they did really kind of start it back with the polio and smallpox vaccines, which were not the success stories that we all think they were. But they do want to create this impression that if you criticize their products, you get a label put on you. You're an anti-vaxxer, and not only that, but that means that even if there were a vaccine that was going to, in a situation like yours, that was going to save your life, you wouldn't take it because it's a religious position. Then, you're an anti-vaxxer and you won't ever do any vaccine because they want to create this impression that we're against these products, not because we've looked at the evidence and we think they're dangerous, but because we have some emotional or religious feeling about them. And they've done a great job of creating that impression. I think it's falling apart now, but only because they've pushed so far and really, I think they've overplayed their hand. But then, as you say, look around at most people and maybe they haven't. Maybe they know something about most people that we don't.
You could say they overplayed, but it was also pretty brilliant the way it was played. I don't know. I mean, I sometimes wonder if this is if libertarians have to figure out what they're doing and copy them. These tricks of the mind and these psychological manipulation tactics that.
I think we need to.
I don't know exactly how you would do it, but I certainly think we need more. We need more Ayn Rand's writing novels. We need more movies like, say, Dallas Buyers Club.
Yes, one of my favorite movies.
And that's something we need. We need probably more musicians like Jordan Page. But from there, I don't know where we go. It's.
Well, if I can put in a quick plug,
we can't just say, we can't, waiting for the system to collapse is certainly something that's going to happen, but we've got to be there.
We don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know. And I think we do need to acknowledge, and I think you're right. That's a big issue with libertarians. It has been for a long time. We need to acknowledge that it's not all about the intellectual understanding. There's these decisions and these beliefs are rooted in something so much deeper. And if I can just make a little plug for my own fiction, because I'm now writing the second book in the series, Annabelle Pickering and the Sky Pirates, which is technically for children, but the feedback I've gotten from adults is I think adults really like it too. It's fantasy and definitely has a libertarian bent to it. But that's kind of what I'm really focusing on, actually building things in the world, and as much as possible with my writing, focusing on fiction, because I think that's how you reach people. I think, again, there's a lot of value to writing straight journalism and intellectual diatribes and books and analysis and all that. But what's really needed, as you say, I think what's desperately needed is fiction, novels, films, stuff that's gonna reach people at the places in their mind where they're forming their opinions about things, where they're forming their beliefs, because it's not the part of the mind that reads position papers.
Yeah, most people aren't going to read that. It's so that's where we go from here. I think maybe crypto could make a difference. But yeah, it's going to be hard to say. I think what bothers me is we're getting more and more to, and maybe it's just like the darkness sits right before the sunlight. I don't know. It's coming up on a second renaissance or something like that. I just hope we can have something left before we go forward. It's
yeah. The hard part is not having a timeline. I believe there is a second renaissance coming, but the question is, how long do we have to wait for it? I mean, and wait's not the right word because there's work to be done, but
yeah.
Are we talking years? Are we talking decades, centuries? I mean,
yeah, things move faster than they used to. I sometimes wonder if that Strauss-Howell generational theory stuff has anything to do with this too.
And what is that?
That's things like the fourth turning. The different generations.
Oh yes. Yeah.
I don't know how valid that is. It's kind of interesting, but I don't know if it's
right.
I try not to be a determinist, but I think there are some things I'm learning about. When Carter Lauren yesterday was talking about what he calls the uncanny valley. I was listening to him talk, and he was. It's something they've noticed with in making robots, and there's a certain place where as you make androids to look more and more like people, but if they get really close, but they're not,
then it's disturbing.
Close, it's very disturbing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if this also applies to some of the infighting that occurs among political people who should be political allies. I mean, why do lots of people fight with people who agree with them on 95% of the issues,
right,
while not fighting with people who agree with them on 50% of the issues? And it's almost as if this was some kind of evolutionary tactic to evolve, because somebody who almost looks like you but doesn't quite look like you, and thinking, okay, he might be an enemy.
Right. I think there's something to that. It's like we're always, even if we're aware of it, I think we're always judging, the person we're speaking to. It's like, do they line up to my ideological points? Are they right on all these things? And I think there is something more disturbing when you find someone who's like, wow, you agree with me on all these things. We're like 98%, but there's this one thing. And then it's like, because it's such a disappointment. Because it's like, man, you were almost perfect. You were almost just like me, which of course nobody's gonna be. And the big challenge is really, it's not, how do I find all the people who are just like me so we can live together? It's how can we live in society with people who, by our very nature, are never going to agree on absolutely everything? What do we need to set up so that we can live peaceably among each other, even though, we're not 100% aligned?
That also would explain why I've often had very much hostility to cover songs.
To what songs?
Cover songs.
Oh,
that makes sense. That's Simon and Garfunkel's song. Don't sing their song. You're not allowed. Nobody can sing their song. Right. Simon and Garfunkel. Right. It doesn't sound quite right, but
it's not supposed to be like that.
I've opened up a little bit to that, but it's definitely something that used to really.
Yeah. Yeah.
The imitation would just be you just would be repulsed by it because
but we are, there's a reason for that. We are wired to make sure that things are the right thing, that it's it should be. So it makes sense. It just doesn't have to rule our lives.
Yeah, or people used to say it's not Van Halen without David Lee Roth, or
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, well, this has been a great talk. Do you have anything else to say before we go? It's
I don't think so. I guess I'll just, if people want to see more of my writing or hear about what I'm
yes,
up to, I'm on Substack. Which I think is just Bretigne.substack.com.
yes,
Buy my book, Annabelle Pickering and the Sky Pirates. And if you're interested in building parallel solutions, I've got a private group where we do that. So, or where we educate
yeah.
ourselves about doing that and get together and work on that. So, um, yeah, just find me at Substack. I think I'm probably, there's all, no, that's it. Just
Yes.
complicate things.
I'm Chris Baker. Please like and please like or thumbs up on this video or subscribe or follow me wherever you are. We're on Odyssey, YouTube, and Rumble. And also go buy my novel Escape from the Village, and I'll be producing some other work in the future soon. I have a Substack as well at Fountainhead Forum, substack.com, fountainheadforum.substack.com. And that's the end. We are out. Thank you for coming on, Brittany. It's been great having you here.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.